The strength of Angela Carter had always known how to navigate the world with grace. A single mother raising 2 kids on her own in a suburban town, Angela worked tirelessly as a nurse at the local hospital. Every day she wore her scrubs with pride, helping save lives, comforting the sick, and offering care to the underserved. It wasn't easy, but it was her, calling her way of making the world just a little bit better for her children, for her patients, and for everyone she encountered. One evening, after a long shift, Angela was on her way home, tired but fulfilled. Her 2 kids were waiting for her at home, and she couldn't wait to get there and spend time with them. The headlights of her car cut through the quiet streets, the night air cool with the promise of an early spring. As she approached an intersection near her neighborhood, she noticed the flashing blue and red lights behind her. Sighing, she pulled over to the side of the road, her hands instinctively resting on the steering wheel. It had been a while since she'd been stopped by the police, but she knew the drill. She kept her hands visible, her demeanor calm, and her mind alert. It was a routine stop. Or so she thought. The officer who approached her car was a tall, stern man with a chiseled jaw and a hard look in his eyes. He was Officer Daniels, known in the community for his cold demeanor and no-nonsense approach. As he came to the window, he didn't immediately speak, but simply stared at her with a look that Angela had learned to recognize all too well, one of judgment. "License and registration," he muttered, his tone clipped. Angela, polite but wary, handed him the requested documents, noting the tension in his posture. She'd been stopped enough times to know that this wasn't going to be a simple exchange. There was something about the way he looked at her that unsettled her. It wasn't just about the traffic violation. It was deeper. Something that reminded her of the kind of person who judged her by the color of her skin, rather than the content of her character. Officer Daniels took a long moment inspecting her information, his eyes lingering on her name for a moment longer than necessary. Angela waited, trying not to let the discomfort show, but her instincts told her something was off. "Do you know why I stopped you?" Officer Daniels finally asked, his voice colder now. "No, officer," Angela replied, trying to stay calm. "I'm just headed home from work." He nodded, his eyes narrowing. "Your taillight is out. It's illegal to drive with a malfunctioning light. I should write you a citation." Angela could feel the frustration rising in her chest. She was tired, so very tired. She had worked a double shift at the hospital, taking care of patients who relied on her. And now here she was, being hassled over something so minor. But she didn't let her emotions show. "I'll get it fixed as soon as I can," she said, trying to keep the conversation respectful. But then the officer did something that caught her off guard. His gaze shifted from the documents to her, and for the first time, he seemed to really see her. His eyes scanned her scrubs, the name tag on her chest, the faint remnants of hospital soap on her hands. For a moment, he seemed to hesitate, almost as if reconsidering something. Then, with a shift in posture, he took a deep breath. "I'll let you off with a warning this time," he said curtly, his tone suddenly less harsh. "But get that taillight fixed." Angela blinked, a little stunned by the abrupt change in his attitude. "Thank you, officer." But as she reached for the door handle to drive off, she saw him hesitate again. His hand gripped the side of his car, his shoulders tense as if caught between conflicting thoughts. Then, in a moment that caught her by surprise, Officer Daniels backed away from her vehicle. He stepped toward the sidewalk, his face suddenly pale as though realizing something he hadn't understood before. I didn't know who you were," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. I thought you were just some other person out here. Just another suspect." Angela stared at him, her mind racing. What was he saying then? With a strange look of unease. Officer Daniels looked at her scrubs again, his voice a little more shaky. This time. You work at the hospital, don't you? Angela nodded slowly, the confusion turning into a sense of growing disbelief. Yes, I'm a nurse at St. Mary's. The officer took a step back, his gaze flickering toward the pavement. He looked suddenly uneasy, his tough exterior cracking. I've heard of you, he said, his voice softer. You're the one who's helped so many people, the ones no one else would. Angela didn't say anything. She just watched as the officer's face flushed with discomfort, as if suddenly aware of how wrong his assumptions had been. It was as if he had just realized in that fleeting moment that the person he had been ready to treat with disdain was not only a hard-working woman, but someone whose contributions to the community made her irreplaceable. Without another word, Officer Daniels turned and walked back to his patrol car. He didn't even look back. As he got in, he drove off without issuing the citation, leaving Angela in stunned silence. As she drove the last few blocks to her home, Angela couldn't help but shake her head in disbelief. It wasn't the first time she had faced prejudice, and it wouldn't be the last. But this time, something had shifted in the officer, something that couldn't be ignored. Maybe it was the realization of his own bias. Maybe it was the glimpse of humanity in her job, the understanding that her life wasn't defined by the color of her skin, but by her actions, her heart, and her unwavering commitment to her community. When she arrived home, Angela hugged her kids tight, grateful for the family she had, for the work she did, and for the one spoken truth that no one, no officer, no stereotype could take away from her. And somewhere deep inside, she hoped that Officer Daniels would carry that lesson with him, too, that sometimes the people you least expect are the ones who change everything.